Because we really want to get to the panel, I just want to tell you who our panel is. Is there anybody who doesn't know what bail is tonight? No? Okay. So I won't give you the definition from the dictionary. I'm just going to tell you how lucky we are tonight to have this amazing panel. We're going to start off with Dr. Ebony Ruhland, who is a professor in the Criminal Justice Department at UC, with my old buddy Ed Latessa. And previously, she was the research director for the Council on Crime and Justice, which is a nonprofit agency specializing in criminal justice research, policy, and direct service. So her research interests include examining how individuals, families, and communities are impacted by crime in the criminal justice system. So Ebony knows a lot about bail. Our second speaker tonight is going to be Julie Wilson. Julie is the assistant prosecutor, chief assistant prosecutor in the Hamilton County office, Joe Dieter's office. For the last 6 years, Julie has also been the public information officer, which means she is everywhere. She's telling Joe what to do in press conferences and things like that. So Julie loves her job. She's always challenged and busy. Third speaker will be Bill Gallagher. And Bill is a criminal defense attorney and a partner with the law firm of Aaronstein and Gallagher. Now, before enrolling in law school, he got a degree in accounting. I have to ask you about that. Okay. Anyway, they're so different. Anyway, for decades now, though, he has been defending the rights of individuals facing criminal charges. And our last speaker will be Stephen JohnsonGrove. Now, Stephen right now is the strategy director at Ohio Transformation Fund, which is a collaborative fund developed by national and local funders advocating for healthy communities and an equitable democracy. I had to read that one. But prior to that, Stephen spent 15 years with the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, and that's how we all know Stephen. So we have 4 amazing speakers. Each one is going to speak for approximately 10 minutes, and after that, we're then going to have maybe about 20 minutes where they can actually talk among each other, because we think that some of the things that one or two of them might say will maybe be something that one or two of the others would like to question or ask about. So they'll have time to do that, and then we will have plenty of time at the end for questions and answers from the audience. Does that sound okay to you guys? Yes. All right, so we will start with Dr. Ruhland.
Good evening. So my name, again, is Ebony Ruhland, and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Criminal Justice at the University of Cincinnati. Can you hear me? Is this on?
Yeah, that's on.
Yeah, hold it close.
Okay. So I just have a presentation on bail because my role is really to kind of give the overview of what the problem is with bail and what some of the reform efforts that are going on across the country that are happening. And so my research really focuses on how criminal justice policies, kind of specifically focusing on community supervision, policing, how sometimes our policies, our practices within the criminal justice system can make it really difficult for people to move on. So when they want to change their lives, when they want to do better, we have these barriers in place that really kind of sometimes keep people stuck. And so one of that aspects is bail, but bail is just a really small portion of what I do because I focus on monetary sanctions and bail is part of that. But when we look at monetary sanctions and the amount that people have to pay that are involved in the criminal justice system, it's really quite a lot with fees and fines and surcharges and restitution. And so there's a lot of monetary consequences for being involved in the criminal justice system. And so just so we're all kind of on the same page, so with the Eighth Amendment, there's not necessarily a constitutional right to bail. So judges do not have to grant bail if they deem that somebody is a risk to society or a risk to public safety. So there's no right to bail. But when bail is set, the Eighth Amendment says that it cannot be excessive, that we cannot give people excessive amounts of bail to pay. Well, that's all that the amendment says. So there's still a lot of discretion on what is considered excessive. So for some people, $10,000 might not be excessive. For some people, $20 might be excessive. If you have nothing, $20 is excessive. So there's little guidance from the courts on, or from legal policies or procedures on what excessive bail means. And so that's sort of one aspect of the debate as well. So money bail is one aspect of bail. And so different types of money bail would be like full cash, where somebody just pays the full amount of bail, whatever a judge orders, and they just go ahead and pay that full amount. Then you have like deposit or surety bails, where individuals might pay a percentage, 10% of that. They might pay 10% of that to the courts, or what we know as bail bondsmen. So they might pay a bail company. But bail is not judges' only options. They can also release people and just give them conditions, release them without money. They can release them just on their own recognizance. So we do have options, or judges do have options available to them as it relates to bail. But the point that we're focused on is money bail, cash bail. So the problem. So what is the problem with money bail? What is the problem with cash bail? So the problem is that many people are incarcerated in jails. They're often there for low-level, non-violent offenses, and they're there simply because they cannot afford their bail. And they might, in fact, be innocent, but they're sitting there because they do not have the means to get themselves out. So no surprise that this disproportionately impacts individuals of color. It disproportionately impacts people from socially disadvantaged communities, people who don't have the means to pay. And then again, you know, I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir, but we understand the collateral consequences of incarceration. So just spending a short period of time in jail because they don't have the funds to pay can have serious consequences on their lives. You might lose your job, you might lose your housing, you have bills to pay that are not getting paid, and you have children that, you know, maybe there's not somebody there to take care of them, so they end up in foster care. So there's a lot of consequences for staying in jail simply because people cannot afford bail. And it's also costly because the government must pay to detain people. So it's actually costly on taxpayers because we're paying to incarcerate people that would otherwise could be let out because they're not a risk, they're not a danger, they're not a flight risk. So it's actually costing us as taxpayers more money. And we know that the cost of incarceration is quite high. It can be about $30,000 to $35,000 per year for one individual. It's unfair because research has shown that people who are incarcerated in pretrial detention, once it is resolved, and if there's a plea or there's a conviction by a jury, that those individuals actually spend or receive longer sentences than the people who were able to be out on bail. So it has consequences, and it makes sense. And from a jury perspective, research shows that juries are more likely to think the individual is guilty if they're in pretrial detention versus somebody who's coming into court off the street. And it's dehumanizing because innocent people who cannot afford are stuck in jail, and we all know that jail is no place, you know, there's poor environments, often overcrowded, and there are dangerous people in jail. So some people who are low-level minor offenders are then mixed with high-risk serious offenders. But one of the challenges, and I'll talk about this, is really the bail bond industry. So this is a well over a $2 billion industry. So bail bonds companies make a lot of money off of this. And we are one of the only nations that have this kind of setup. I think it's the Philippines is the other country, but we are the only sort of nation that has this system. And it's a huge lucrative business. And I actually, in my class that I teach for master's students, I show a video about how all the money that these bail companies are bringing in and the lifestyles that they're living in. It's actually, I'm kind of scared to show the video because I don't want them to go off and be bail bondsmen, but it's a very lucrative business. And they're fighting, and one of the challenges to reform is actually the bail bonds company who are fighting these reforms. Oh, that slide didn't. This slide was just gonna, sorry, for whatever reason the formatting's off. But I was just going to go over the history of reform. But since I only have 10 minutes, I'm getting probably close to that time. But some of the early reforms were in the 60s with the Manhattan Bail Project. And one of the things that they did was they tried to release people on their own recognizance who, if they could determine those that were not a danger to society, so they weren't going to go off and commit more crimes, and they weren't a flight risk, so they would show up for all their court hearings. And what they found was they actually had great success. So when they were able to kind of determine through different risk assessments that I'll talk about in the next slide, they were actually better off. So it's better when we can use more informed, educated decisions based versus just using our discretion to determine bail. So, as I was going to talk about more of the history, so we've been dealing with bail reform since the 60s. But then in the 80s, we kind of swung back and bail reform kind of halted, and it was about more so keeping people who had felony offenses, especially at the federal level, incarcerated. So in the 60s, it was sort of like a presumption of release. That should be like, we should presume that we're going to release people. And then in the 80s, we kind of went backwards, but that's a lot of our system. A lot happened in the 80s and 90s where we kind of got a little tougher on crime. So concerns over bail continue today because of mass incarceration and overcrowding in our jail systems. We understand that it's a system of unjust, so we understand that it's unequal treatment. Those who can pay, get out. Those who can't pay, stay in. And so we're focused on the elimination of money bail. And one way that we can do that is through the use of pre-trial risk assessments. And so we can determine through the public safety assessment, this is one of the first assessments to really look at this other than the Manhattan Bail Project. And it's still new, so it still needs to be evaluated, but early evaluations are showing promising results. And so they're taking a number of factors, primarily like criminal history, current offense, ties to the community, those types of things, and they can determine who is low risk, medium risk, and high risk. And so high risk people, you would just automatically keep in prison or in jail, and let the trial play out or let the plea deal play out. With medium risk people, you might still let them out with no bail, but we can put conditions on them. We can say that you need to check in with a probation officer, or you need to have an electronic bracelet or other kinds of things, drug testing. So there's still things we can even do with medium risk that we don't have to necessarily put money on them. And then with low risk people, we can be fairly confident that we don't have to do anything. They're gonna still show up for court and they're not gonna be a risk to public. So just some examples of reform throughout the country. About 25 states have made or proposed modifications to their current system. And the examples of reform are using those assessments that I talked about. The assessment that I showed on the previous slide is actually the name of the assessment, one of the assessments that's being used. Some states have actually gone to no cash bail for certain offenses. So if there's low-level misdemeanor offenses, it's an automatic presumption of release. And I think that's what New York is doing. New York right now just implemented where it's low-level misdemeanors. So and it's new. It just happened, I don't know, a couple months ago. This year. So again, we have to evaluate that. And then just that having that assumption that people will be released unless they demonstrate that they truly are a risk to society. So sorry, this slide didn't turn out either. These were like images, graphics. So some myths are that we will be less safe if we just let people out on bail. That's a complete myth. I mean, we're actually less safe now because if somebody can afford their bail, then they're let out. Regardless, I mean, if the judge, even if the judge thinks that they're a risk, so they'll just set a high bail, and if they can afford that high bail, they're released. And so with these risk assessments and with these other tools where we can more confidently determine if people are high risk, that actually makes us as a society much safer, because if somebody is deemed high risk, then a judge would keep them in jail, no matter if they had the money to be released or not. If somebody was deemed medium risk, then we could go ahead and we could put conditions on them, so we could kind of keep an eye on them and monitor them more closely. I don't remember what my other myths were. I know that was one of them, so I apologize. And this slide's really important because this is sometimes where we hit the barriers, and this is what New York is facing right now, where they're saying, you know, people are going to go out and commit crimes if we have this kind of system. And so
victim protection also with the New York, they're saying that the myth that the victims are, we're trying to protect our victims, people going back to court testifying against the defendant, victims are being, you know, literally saving the victim from possible harm because of the defendant. That's another myth.
Right, and that's a good point too. And then that's, I mean, again, that with conditions, then a judge could put on, you know, stay no contact with the victim. You know, they can even put on like geographical restrictions so that the individual can stay away from the victim if that is indeed a concern. And then one of the other myths is that this would be costly. To do these reforms, that this would be costly. But again, it would actually save us money because we as taxpayers wouldn't be paying for people who are incarcerated simply because they cannot afford it. We would be getting those people out of jail, and we would ease the jail populations as well. And another concern, again, that crime would increase because we're letting people out. But we have to remember that a lot of these people might be innocent, and a lot of these people are in there for just very low-level minor offenses anyways. So these are just examples of conditions that judges can do. So if we feel a little bit uneasy about this, again, judges can, you know, make them come in, meet with a probation officer or some caseworker. A judge can restrict travel. Electronic home monitoring, although UCCI just did a report that shows that electronic home monitoring is not that, you know, it makes us as a society feel safer, but really it's kind of useless. And then, for a lack of a better word. And then we could, you know, put treatment restrictions, or, you know, have them attend treatment. We could get their guns. So if we're concerned, we can do these things. And that doesn't, I mean, it doesn't mean that it's not happening with money bail, but it might not be happening. If somebody pays, they might still be doing all these stuff. So we as a society are still actually at risk. And so benefits to bail reform are that it makes the system much more fair, because it's not just for those who can pay versus those who cannot pay. It makes us safer because we are taking into consideration those high-risk people, and we're keeping those people. And then we also have the cost savings, as I mentioned, that we're saving costs by not incarcerating people that don't otherwise need to be there. So that was quick, but we only had 10 minutes. And so I will be available for questions after we're done with the panel.
That was a great background. That was a great background for us. Now we'll hear some ideas on what the prosecutor and what a criminal defense lawyer and what Stephen thinks about bail reform, how they think it should go.
So good evening, and thank you all for inviting me. I'm glad to be here tonight. The good news is we are all really, really lucky, I think, to live in Hamilton County. And we have so many resources here. We have so many things available that when you go speak in other jurisdictions, quite frankly, people are just so surprised at the treatment centers we have here, all of our specialty courts for veterans, for change court for victims of sex trafficking, all the diversion programs. So we're really lucky in so many ways. Now, is Hamilton County perfect? Of course not. But I was also heartened by the professor's presentation, because so many of the things that she mentioned are in place. The good news is they are in place in Hamilton County, Ohio. So very quickly, I mean, what is bail? It's a very short legal definition. I'll just read it to you from the Ohio Revised Code. It's defined as the security for the appearance of an accused to appear in answer to a specific criminal or quasi-criminal charge in any court or before any magistrate at a specific time or at a time to which a case may be continued, and not to depart without leave. So basically it's to ensure that you come back to court for the next date. And judges or a magistrate set the bail, and the prosecutor, which is from my office, or a Bill Gallagher person, we obviously could have a recommendation if we wanted to give the court that. Now, as the professor mentioned, as Dr. Ruhland mentioned, you can post it by cash, through a bail bondsman, or you might get what's called an OR bond, which is a promise to come back on your own recognizance. So when a judge sets a bond, by law in Ohio, you have to look at the seriousness of the offense, the previous criminal record, if any, of the person, and also the possibility the defendant will come back to court. And in some cases, if it's very serious, you could be denied bail, but that's very, very unusual and does not happen in my experience in Hamilton County. So this is really a timely topic. It's being discussed nationwide, but also in Hamilton County. So what I can talk about, what I have been looking at, is what's going on in Hamilton County, Ohio. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong, if anything? So I can tell you that, and Charmaine McGuffey is here, so Charmaine knows way more about the Justice Center than I do, and all the things good and bad that happen there. But I've been tasked by my boss, Joe Dieters, to go to look into this and find out who's at our Justice Center. And it really is centered around the topic that, the idea that's out there that we have a lot of low-level offenders in our Hamilton County Justice Center who cannot post bail. So the jail, as Charmaine would tell you, it's a living, breathing organism. The population changes, oh gosh, probably minute by minute. I mean, it's people are in, people are out. So I've talked to people, looked at lists, but of course, that's just for a certain day, a certain time. But I've done as much research as I can. And in my research, I have not seen people who are in our jail on low-level offenses who cannot post bond. I cannot find those people. Now, Bill might have some names for us, Bill, my colleague and friend, Bill Gallagher. So I'm going to want those names to try to check that out. So somebody here is going to say, well, wait a minute. My brother or my cousin or my friend, they're in jail on a low-level offense. But let me explain to you some legal parameters, and Bill can explain this too. You may be there on a low-level offense because you have a holder from another county. So we cannot release you, if, for instance, you're wanted in Claremont County or Butler County. We can set a low bond, but we cannot even if you post out, we cannot let you go because you are wanted in another jurisdiction. You may have a bond on a low-level offense that you might think, well, that's high for, an M4, whatever. But you may have a history of failing to appear. Some of the cases I looked at, the reason there was a higher bond was because the person had capious or failed to appear 20 times in the last year. So to get that person to come back, the judge felt that he or she had to set a higher bond. And there also may be a request for a competency evaluation, and if that request is made, that person will be held for that evaluation to be done. So before if somebody tells you, oh, so-and-so was in jail for this low-level offense, there may be some other reasons you don't know about that would require that person to be held. Now, the other good news, and some of the things that Dr. Ruhland mentioned, was we have going on here, we have a really excellent pretrial services division. And these people work 24/7 every day of the year that office is fully staffed. And their goal is to review all of the cases that come in and to try to figure out how to get bonds set as quickly as possible and to get people out of the jail. So we do arraignments, and that's the docket where you go in to have it's just typically your first appearance where you have your bail, your bond set. And we use the terms bail and bond sort of interchangeably in our legal system. So those arraignments are 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. And as your friend from court, you mentioned about Court Watch, everybody can go down and watch these arraignments. You don't have to believe me, don't take my word for anything. If you're interested and inclined, you can go down and watch and see really what does happen in our court. We also have, as part of our pretrial services division, what's called a failure to appear unit. So even if on certain low-level offenses, let's say you didn't show up for some reason, you forgot, you just didn't feel like it, I don't know what, we will let you come back to court. You can go in and just get a notice just to come back on another day. You don't even have to go through the jail again. And that is a tremendous service to keep people from having to go back into the jail and go through the whole rigmarole again. We also now have many more electronic monitoring units, the ankle bracelets that we had before. So I know there's some issues, as the professor mentioned, there's some debate and some discussion about that, but whether you like it or not, we now have more of those units that are available for people to get out under that electronic monitoring that we had in the past. So even if you think, oh, you know, this Julie Wilson, she seems nice enough, but really I don't believe her. I really don't think she knows what she's talking about. Even if we wanted to hold all of these people, and we really don't, but you don't have to believe me, but we have a federal consent decree that says your Hamilton County Jail can only hold X number of people. And if we go above that, people have to get out. So we don't have room at the inn to keep all these people. Even if you think there's some conspiracy to keep them in, there's just not room for all these people. Now, could someone fall through the cracks? Of course. The system is dependent on it could be human error, there could be computer glitch, all kinds of things can happen, that there could be somebody out there that has a case that went awry. So I keep asking people, give me this, I want to find out. So I told Bill, if you have names, I want these names. I'm going to go research this tomorrow. I want to find out, you know, what happened. Was there a problem? Was there a glitch? And for those of you who follow this, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion. For instance, Councilman Sittenfeld, he wrote an editorial back on April 20th. The Enquirer had a thumbs up on the 24th. Gabe Davis had an article on May the 26th, and Ray Fowler just recently had an article on February the 13th. And, you know, slightly different takes on things, but a lot of it mentioned these low-level offenders who are in jail. So Joe Dieters, we wrote to PG, and he has some lawyers working with him. We wrote to him back in July, and we said, please give us 10 names. Just give us some names we can look at so I can see, you know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm missing something. Who are these people? And we have not gotten a response to get any names. I called my friend Ray Fowler, who I like and have known forever, and his article, full disclosure, in fairness, was just a couple days ago. So I called Ray and I said, can you give me some names of somebody? And I didn't really expect that Ray was going to know, because he's, you know, up here, and he referred me to somebody else, which is fine. Then I asked that person, very nice, do you have some names? He said, oh, I'll get back to you, but I haven't heard yet. So I don't have any names to look at to find out, did someone fall through the cracks? I don't know. Now, one interesting thing, this may be a little too in the weeds for some of you, but the city of Cincinnati, they handle and prosecute any misdemeanor that occurs in the city of Cincinnati. My office, the county prosecutor's office, we handle all the misdemeanors in the county and all of the felonies for county and city. So when Councilman Sittenfeld wrote his piece, and he said that they were going to direct their prosecutors to not request bonds on these low-level cases. And I asked Bill just before we started, because I don't go to that docket, I don't have any reason to, because anecdotally I had heard that those prosecutors were still asking for bonds, but Bill says that's changed now, right, Bill, that they've stopped that. But what's interesting is, and Joe mentioned in one of his opinion pieces, that if the city wanted to, they could tomorrow morning, they could direct the Cincinnati Police Department, do not arrest these low-level offenders. You can legally cite them to jail. That would solve that problem. Now, but that's a city issue. That's not, I have no control over that. But if they wanted to, the city could do that. But I still don't think we have these people in jail on these low-level offenses, other than as I described with some other parameters around them. Now, and the big picture nationwide, I read the New York Times every day. This is an issue, as I understand it, in other parts of the country and other jurisdictions. The good news is I just don't think it's a problem in Hamilton County. Now, and some of the things, again, that the professor mentioned, I mean, we're using here, and other articles will mention, oh, I wish we had a risk assessment tool. we've got a risk assessment. And now there's some issues about those tools now. I know some people aren't so crazy about that, but for better or worse, we have one, we use that. We do have so many services here to refer people to drug treatment for, you know, the secure housing, all these different things we have going on. Again, is it perfect? Of course not. But a lot of the things that other jurisdictions want and say they want to implement, we already have it in Hamilton County. Now, I'm not going to tell you that we're perfect, that there are no issues here with race or poverty or things like that in our justice system. Of course, there are things we should be working on. But the good news is, any of you can come to court to watch arraignments any day. You can go into, there's some judges here, I'm sure they would tell you, you can come to their court any day you want. Go down, see what your judges are doing, the judges you elect. Are they doing the job you think they're doing? Come watch the prosecutors in action, come watch the defense attorneys. If you want to see what's going on, the courthouse is open. You can come down and watch anytime you want and see. It's very interesting. If you're interested in this, it's very interesting to see firsthand what really happens. But I'll ask any of you, if anybody has a name, you can give it to me after the session's over, and I'm happy to look into it, because I just can't find these low-level offenders who can't post bail in our jail. Again, maybe every place else it's a problem, I just don't see it here. So thank you, Susan. That's my little opening.
Thank you, Julie.
Let's understand something. The majority of people that are held pre-trial are presumed innocent, are being held there either out of fear or out of anger. A judge fears the person, so locks them up and keeps them on a bail they can't afford, or is angry at them for some misgiving and decides to set a bail that they can't afford. Because everybody that's being held pre-trial, it's presumed innocent, is there because they cannot afford the bail or they would be out. All right, so let's understand that to begin with. That's why they're in jail. Now we can talk a little bit about what statistics say and what science says, because I think that bail decisions really should be data-driven and not just anecdotal-driven. So what people believe in their hearts, and I understand this, is if you've missed court before, you'll miss court in the future, and you don't go into why someone has missed court. Let's understand the obstacles for someone who's poor in Cincinnati when they're asked to come to court for a low-level crime. A speeding ticket or a small misdemeanor charge. When you have to go to work, or do you go to court? If you miss the bus, what do you do now? If you don't have a car, what do you do? If your ride doesn't show up, what do you do? Or if you just simply forgot. If you fail to appear once or twice before, a judge may use that and now set a bail that you can't make on purpose. Why? To keep you in custody so that you will then appear in court in custody. They don't set a bail higher so that you'll post it. They know you won't post it. There is no correlation between the amount of money posted and someone's likelihood to come to court. There is none. Every study that's ever been done says it does not exist. We think it does. If you put up more money, you have more skin in the game. If you're poor and those obstacles are there, they're there no matter what. But what we do know is what the fallout is within 24 to 48 hours if you're held in custody when you are poor. We know you lose your job. We know you lose your housing. We know you lose your places. We know your family begins to disintegrate in some places. And those things may not be repaired. So neighborhoods are affected, employers are affected, and a lot of other things are affected when someone is locked up in 24, 48 hours. And these are presumed innocent people. We're not talking about the convicted people. And I want to talk a little bit about them in a second. So the services that are available to all of these people are only available if you can afford to get out of jail. You don't get to go out to treatment. You don't get to go to all these services unless you first can get out of jail. If you're in jail, you don't get those services pre-trial before a guilt determination. You sit and you wait. Nationally, 25% of the people in county jails are there pre-trial. The 75% are serving some form of sentence. Hamilton County, 39% of our inmates on a regular basis are pretrial detainees. We are 50% higher than the national average on people being held pretrial presumptively innocent. We can talk about holders keeping people in custody. We can talk about holders like in Elmwood, improper display of plate prevents somebody from going somewhere. Norwood, speeding ticket. Those are the type of holders sometimes that keep poor people in jail. Why? Because they can't make the $300-400 bail here. So we can use holders as an excuse as why people are there, but that's not it. And we can use failures to appear. But the problem is failure to appear is not fleeing. Here's considered flight risk. Flight risk is someone who wants to avoid prosecution right from the beginning, not someone who has missed court. We have lots of opportunities to put in place, and we won't put in place and have not put in place, those small, easy, economical things that help people come to court that we know have worked in other places. Why? Because there are studies that tell us those things. Court reminders, text reminders. Let's get rid of some of the barriers. There is up in Cleveland right now a bail project that's doing what? Helping people with the transportation to get people to come to court who have that barrier. Helping people with services about child care when you have to decide, do I get my child to child care or do I go to court? Why? Because when I show up to court, there is not a judge in that building that likes to have a parent show up with a child. Come watch those courtrooms and see what happens when a parent has to decide to show up to court with a child, and see what happens to that parent and how they're shamed about the idea they brought a child to court. There are a lot of things that are there for people with money. But we have pretrial systems, not through pretrial services, because pretrial services takes the direction from the judges. Pretrial services would like to do a lot more, I'm suggesting to you. I think they would like to do a lot more to help people reduce those barriers. But there are a lot of people in jail on low-level felonies, or in low-level misdemeanors, nonviolent offenses, who are there, who have some failures to appear. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. But we know New York City is already reporting the fears were unfounded. Crime has not increased when they got rid of bail. People are showing up to court. St. Louis, Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco, Louisville, Indianapolis, Cleveland, all that where these bail projects have been in place are reporting what? A greater number of people are coming to court than before they were there. More releases. People keeping their jobs. Cases are being resolved quicker, not longer, quicker. And the system is moving better. With fewer people in jail. Not more, with fewer people in jail. And let's talk for a moment about the federal mandate about releasing people from jail and reducing. Do you know how we're reducing our jail population? We are not going back in and figuring out those people who are presumptively innocent that maybe we should release today that we didn't think we should have released last week. We're going in and helping the guilty get out early. The programs that were in place are taking people who have already been convicted of a crime, get them out early to create room for who? Other pretrial detainees. We started a new program that everyone is now talking about called the CAS program. You know what its purpose is to take multiple defendant DUI offenders. You want to talk about risky people, let's talk about multiple defendant DUI offenders are able to go to work immediately upon getting a sentence, because we don't want the people convicted of DUIs to miss a day of work, to separate them from their families, to separate them from their community, and we have set up a program so they don't have to go to jail, while someone presumed innocent is sitting on a low bail that they can't afford because they're poor. Do we want to talk about the most racially diverse crime there is in Hamilton County besides domestic violence? It's OVI. I will bet you that program would not have come in place if 90% of the OVI multiple offenders were people of color. We don't want our white people sitting in the jail. They won't say that, but let's talk about the crime that we're doing. We set up all these programs for vets and everyone else, and I get all that, and they should. But we're not doing enough for the people that are poor who are presumed to be innocent. We don't release them on conditions that they get into treatment, OR. We don't release them and reconnect them with the services that are necessary. We don't do any of that. We don't ask pretrial services for a report on the services necessary. We ask pretrial services just to do this little quick research assessment, and most judges ignore it. Sit in room A when bail is set. You'll never hear a judge in room A setting bail refer to any risk assessment whatsoever. They set policy bonds. Well, you're charged with a burglary, it's always $10,000. You're charged with possession, it's always $5,000. Oh, you're charged with a DV, it's always $10,000. And they make alternative bonds. And they make alternative bonds not for the rich, but for the poor. And let me give you the example. The professor talked about bail, at whatever amount it is. A person steps up, and many of the judges say, I'll set your bond at $5,000. That means you need $500 to get out. But if you don't have $500, you can be out on electronic monitoring. Bravo. Bravo. A poor person gets to be monitored 24/7. A poor person on electronic monitoring is on house arrest. That means when they're not at work, they're in their house with a bracelet on. You want to talk about demeaning? Have a parent tell a child why they can't go to the park after school, because electronic monitoring doesn't allow for walks in the park. Get an emergency phone call to go to a parent-teacher conference, you can't go because you have to get pretrial approval to go out of the house to go to something like that. How about walking around in the summertime and have to explain why you have an ankle monitor on? You have it on you, not because you're someone that they fear, it's because you didn't have $500. And that's fair. We don't do that with the people with money. We do that to the poor. We put them on electronic monitoring. We make them feel demeaned and less than someone else because they didn't have a few $100s. Why is $500 to a rich person okay? And then the same bond is set the next person, the next bond, on the next charge on the same thing on a poor person at $5,000. It's because the judges are not considering someone's economic status when setting bond. They do not. If you decide someone is supposed to get bond, that means you are saying that they should be released on certain conditions. That's what you're saying. You're not saying they're supposed to be detained. If you want to detain them, there's a statute to do that. If you want them kept in jail, there's a statute that you can have a hearing on anybody you want to. But the moment you set bail, you are saying you are able to be released. And the conditions are supposed to be reasonable and they're supposed to be fair. And you begin with, what can this person afford? What can this person afford? Because if it's a, hey, bail, all you're doing is detaining them. And you might as well just, you're avoiding what the law says, which is to have a hearing and follow the statute. And so you're setting ransom. And that's what I heard. One lawyer stand up in front of a judge, and an amount of money was set up, and he looked at the judge, and the judge said, is there anything else? He goes, yes, now that you've established a ransom, can we talk about bail? And it may seem a little bit funny, but we watch that happen in court all the time. But if we're doing at least fact-based decisions, if we're going in terms of what the science says, then we can make better decisions about it. And I don't like risk assessments. I think there's a lot of problems with many of them. And the risk assessment our judges use don't even pertain to bail, it pertains to probation and ideas of recidivism. It has nothing to do about someone's likelihood to come back to court. There are a lot of things that need to be done to correct this system. The number one factor, we know this, there's studies, the number one factor that determines whether someone goes to prison or is on probation is the status at the time that they are sentenced. If you are in custody, you are more likely to receive a jail sentence than probation. If you are in custody, you are more likely to receive a prison sentence than probation for the same offense, and they got rid of all the other factors and took about. That's it. Believe it or not. Why? A judge looking at someone has a tendency to keep them right where they are. Right where they are. There's a really good reason why someone needs to be out of bail. Clients know that. Clients know that. Someone is kept in jail without the ability to post bond. They are more likely to plead guilty when in fact they are not. There are studies to support that. Look at some of the DNA exonerations that have happened. There are people who were innocent who pled. Why? Because they were locked up and they had a chance to do something. Go home. Tell someone you can go home today when they've been locked up 2 weeks and 3 weeks and 4 weeks without their family. You are surprised at the number of people who said, you know what? I didn't do this. I could beat this. Yeah, trial's next week or in a month. I can go home today. Give it to me. And there are a lot of our judges and our prosecutors and others who know that is the same as well. Please get coerced. Trials get avoided, and we move the system along quicker if people are locked up. And it works better that way. And so let's understand where that started from. And let's deal with it, and let's address it. It's not about being fair. If it was about being fair, we'd be letting out a lot more people and asking them to come to court. The idea that the more serious the charge, the more likely someone is not going to come to court is exactly upside down. The more serious your offense, the more likely you are to come to court. It sounds weird, but it makes sense when you think a little bit about it. When you think a little bit about it. When the penalties are right there, you're going to try and work hard to get rid of those obstacles. When those are a fine only or a small slap on the wrist, you might decide to go to work instead of going to court. When you're looking at prison and other things, you go to court, you show up, you're on top of the case. So let's deal with those obstacles on those lower people, and we'll improve it. We'll improve the return rate. We'll improve all of that. And when you're not locked up, you're a better citizen. When you're not locked up, you're working. When you're not locked up, you're productive. You're being a parent. You're being a partner. You're being a child. And you're there to help, and you're productive. When you're locked up, you're sucking money away from all the taxpayers. And that's what it is about. So let's get people out. But there are a lot of people. I'm not going to, we can give these, but we're going to disagree, Julie. I know you're going to disagree in terms of why some of these people are in. But they're in there because they can't afford it. And that's just real simple.
Thank you so much. I knew this would be a passionate issue, and it is. It is. So next we'll hear from Stephen. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks. This has been great. I don't want to belabor anything. I think you all covered it very thoroughly. But there's so much going on. People that know me, I've been around Cincinnati for 15 years, working on a lot of different criminal justice reform. I've worked with Senator Thomas on several things. There's nothing I've worked on that's been more slippery and complex than bail reform. Only because there's so many sub-issues and things that look like reform and are really just shiny objects that aren't reform. And so I want to just... Oh, sorry. I guess I want to just suggest that so I'll throw out some things that maybe we can talk about, and I actually don't even... It would take me, you know, like Dr. Ruhland, you know, I've run out of PowerPoint slides. So there's a couple things that are really exciting. One is there's a bail project in Cleveland where there are individuals, there's two wonderful men whose job it is basically just to pay people's bails, a nonprofit bail bondsman, essentially. They're a nonprofit, but they provide services, they pay the people come back to court, the money gets recycled in, nobody's building a mansion, I forget who's talking, yes, right. Nobody's living the high life in Cadillacs, or whatever. So, you know, the bail project is an alternative to bail. It sort of leaves the bail system intact as it is, but it's a nonprofit system to avoid the profiteering. New York State, as Bill alluded to, has the by far most aggressive, assertive bail reform in the country, essentially eliminated cash bail. The sky has not fallen, although many Chicken Littles are out there saying the sky is falling. I'm just hoping the sky will fall because they want to get their money made again. So that's happening in New York. We can talk about New York. And I'm just laying out things. If anyone wants to ask me questions about things, I'll answer those questions. But I can't really get too deep into them. Another one, the Pretrial Justice Institute has been around since 1960. I was just looking it up, 66 or 64. The Pretrial Justice Institute was started by the Vera Institute, but Pretrial Justice Institute has probably worked with, well, hundreds, I think, of municipalities, counties, states around the country on bail reform since the 60s. They've researched every kind of jail you can imagine that exists. And basically, all their data, I've talked to their executive director at length about this, it basically says you can let out, basically, of all the people, if you take the universe of people arrested, 70% of those people should be cited. Period. Never go to jail. They should not be booked, okay? The remaining 30% should get a hearing within 24 hours, and that remaining 30%, 15 to 20% of those people should walk with the most minimal conditions possible. The least restrictive conditions that allows them to come back or to be supported in their life if they need mental health or drug treatment in the intervening time. The remaining 10 to 15% should be held. If we had that, we would not have the whole. So we have a federal cap on our jail, but it's still overcrowded. So the federal cap is in the 1,000, 1,100, I think. 1260. There you go. So 1260. The jail was designed for 850, and Charmaine McGuffey was there when the thing was built. Do you know? You know.
Don't
Okay.
call her out on that.
I know, but you know that it was overcrowded the next week. Yes, it was designed for 850 or 860, and it's been overcrowded since the day it was built. People are sleeping in, you know, those plastic sleds you kids go on. We don't get snow in Cincinnati, but that's what people are sleeping on tonight. They are sleeping on hard floors in plastic sleds right now. Okay, for me, this is a human rights catastrophe that we go to bed on every single night in this county. That is unacceptable to me. So. The last thing I'll just say is about risk assessments are basically just dressed up systemic racism. Risk assessments are basically very fancy algorithms that compress and compile previously racist data about people's prior arrest rates, which are higher in black communities because they're higher policed. And every bit of data we have going back decades shows that at every single stage in the criminal justice system, people of color, black people in particular, get treated harsher. They get harsher sentences, they get policed more, they get higher bails, every single step. And so the fact that then you take that data and compress it down into this beautiful black box called a risk assessment, which, by the way, the companies don't tell you what the algorithm is. A defense attorney can't even cross-examine the data in court, but how those out, they basically are taking, garbage in, garbage out, okay, racism in, racism out. So, and the beautiful thing is that the Pretrial Justice Institute, again, the probably most respected entity in this country that I know of, working specifically and exclusively on bail for decades, across, like I said, every kind of jail size, city, country you can imagine, has just come out with a statement saying pretrial risk assessments are incorrigible. They are irredeemable. They are, as I just said, racism in, racism out. And they're not needed. You can get safety, you can maximize liberty, you can maximize public safety, and maximize public fiscal frugality. All three of those things without using risk assessments at all. I say all this because there's a lot of things going on. Kevin there was asking me about Criminal Rule 47. 46, excuse me, Criminal Rule 46, and the amendments to that are being proposed by the House Supreme Court, which are much ado about nothing. I will tell you, there's rules that the Supreme Court has promulgated, or amendments that look like bail reform but actually do nothing. There are no procedural safeguards that actually require the judge to do anything different, or judges to do anything different than they're doing right now. So we definitely need bail reform. It is, as a citizen, I sympathize with you. I've been reading about this for months, and especially spent the last 2 days just getting ready for this, and my eyes were crossing at the sort of shifty nature of what bail reform actually looks like. I hope we can ask more questions and debate some of the ideas about what bail reform could look like. But it is not, I guess I hope we can walk away tonight with some sharper understanding of what bail reform could be and should be, and with a real eye towards the outcomes. We can get down into the weeds about the mechanics, risk assessments or non-risk assessments, ability to pay hearings, when and how the judge makes fact findings, and what's the standard of evidence, all that stuff. It really matters a lot to me. But the end of the day is, what's the outcome? Are there fewer people in jail? Are we getting, what the Pretrial Justice Institute says is completely possible without risk assessments? 70% of people just walk with citations, 20% get a hearing and walk in 24 hours, 10% get held. Can we get to that kind of an outcome? Because then we would have a safer, healthier community with fewer people crowding our prisons and jail. I'll stop there.
Oh, wow. So what I'd like to do now is give each of them just a few minutes to rebut or discuss something that one of the other panelists might have said, something that you've heard. And in the interest of time, we want to save time for questions from the audience, so if you could keep it to just a couple of minutes, that would be good.
So there's just two points that I want to make. The risk assessment point, I hear that a lot, that risk assessments are biased, they're inherently biased. Okay, risk assessments, I agree, have room for improvement, but risk assessments, research shows, are far and away better than personal and professional judgment. People are inherently biased. People, a lot of judges aren't from the communities that the people in the criminal justice system are from. And so they make a lot of judgments about people, a lot of racist judgments. And when we look at one of the studies I did with parole board decision making, the risk tool is much better than individual decision making. So I think that, I agree that there's room for improvement, but I just get a little hesitant when we say let's throw away the risk assessment, because personal discretion is scary, just to be quite honestly. Because we say implicit bias, but some people actually have explicit bias as well. So I'm going with the risk assessment right now. Secondly, I will say that we often say low-level, nonviolent misdemeanors, but if we just focus on that, we're not going to get our way out of this problem. We also have to look at people who are considered high risk, people who have felonies, because again, that innocent until proven guilty is very important. So even on those people, the presumption should be probably released.
I got nothing to say, so.
Thank you. Yes, and I totally agree that if we're comparing risk assessments versus wide open discretion, risk assessments are better. But that's a detour we don't need to take because there are guardrails we could put in place, like New York State has done, that obviate the need for risk assessments and get better results, both racially and in terms of just general overall reduction of incarceration. So I do think, yes, that they're a stepping stone, but they're sort of like a stepping stone in my opinion, we don't need. We can get better results that are actually less complicated by setting up higher standards for what it means to actually detain somebody, making it liberty, the presumption. For example, we should have a presumption of release. That would be a great, simple first rule, is that the presumption is someone is released from jail, that there has to be clear and convincing evidence on the record of why someone should be held. Right now we have this flipped assumption. It's just the everyday mill down there that bail, high bails, and somebody being held is the norm. But the presumption should be release. As I think, Bill, you said it so well. If bail is being set, I mean, it almost boggles the mind that we don't realize this. If bail is being set, that's actually an implicit acknowledgement that that person should be released. That's what bail means. This person is supposed to be released. So if they're not being released because they don't have enough money to pay that amount, then the reason that bail was set was actually to hold them. There is actually a whole different statute. It's got higher procedural safeguards for someone called preventative detention. That is, if we really think you're a danger to the community, you have to go through this whole list of other things. That is almost never used by prosecutors or judges or defense attorneys downtown. It's just skipped, because if you send a $10,000 bail, no one's going to be able to pay it. So I mean, I just could go on about how crazy some of our assumptions are about what how our bail system works. And I guess the thing I want to lift up again about the bail project in Cleveland is what the bail project does, in addition to paying people's bails, it helps people, it gets to know them, it interviews them, what's going on in your life, how can I help you get to court on time, and what, by the way, what led to this argument in the street that got you locked up? Well, it was, this neighbor-to-neighbor dispute about a dog, or, whatever it is. They end up solving a lot of the problems that actually led to the criminal justice involvement in the first place, whether it was a familial dispute or a neighbor dispute or a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue, and then they help people get connected to services. It's a radical approach of treating people with dignity. Right now, again, we have people sleeping on the floor in plastic sleds. That means that we don't treat human beings with dignity. We don't think they deserve dignity in this county. If we actually had a system that was set up to treat people with dignity, we wouldn't be doing this. We would be finding other ways to solve the problems that led people to the conflict that got them in touch with the criminal justice system.
Just a couple things. One thing that concerned me, Professor, was when you mentioned that in jury trials, the juries would know if they were locked up or not. That does not happen, should not happen. And Bill, you've never had that experience. It shouldn't happen.
When your client has two sheriffs sitting next to him.
Well, but they're not in a jail suit.
They're not in a jail suit, but they do have two guards.
But there are always deputies in the courtroom. I mean, I'm just going to point out, I don't want people to think that you came in your prison garb or shack or anything like that, because that does not happen.
Yes, it does.
Not for a jury trial. Not for it may in front of a judge, but not for a jury trial.
I was turned away at the clerk last week at the post at property, bringing jail clothes in. The clerk told me at the property desk, these aren't good enough. He'll be in stripes.
But not for
I had to go
jury.
fight that last week for a jury trial.
And he can give you the names. But my whole thing is, I wanted to know about this.
But let her finish, I think she's got
We're just
to
gonna let the panel finish, and then we'll have questions.
Well, that was just a minor, but I didn't want anybody to think that, at least I've never seen it happen where somebody came in.
My data was national too.
Yeah, that I've never seen anybody come in their jail outfit for a jury trial. I've never seen that happen. And then you may be surprised. I mean, I agree with most of what Bill said. I just don't, I know, you're very, very smart. But I cannot find those people.
You recorded that, right?
It's not tape, Bill, yeah. But I do want those names because I just can't find, and again, what I was focused on was Hamilton County low-level offenders being held I just can't find it. So I would really be now we may still disagree, as you said, about some finer points of it, but I agree there are collateral consequences. I mean, I have no desire to see people lose their jobs, lose their children. I mean, I understand the barriers that, that exist, but I just can't find those people in our justice center, at least the snapshots I looked at. So.
Joey, I'm not going to try, it depends on what low is low, right?
Right, like I said, we can agree to disagree on stuff, yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to use the person's name, but I mean, someone charged with a false alarm and disorderly conduct in an accident, a short clear distance, which only carries a fine. Stopping after an accident, which also carries a small this was a traffic violation, not a criminal one. Bonds and all those were $10,000 on each, so $40,000 for somebody who they had a holder, and that's why nothing would happen. This is what we talked about. The holder was
10%.
the 10%. So you need $4,000 for this person, represented by the Public Defender's Office, so you know they don't have $4,000. Right. The holder was for an improper display of license plate, which could be an expired tag.
Right.
Ticket that wasn't paid to no one. But I'm saying that those are the sort of examples of, you go down with someone else. There was someone who was charged with a trespass, which was at a convenience store, in a disorderly conduct, in a theft. That person's bond is $30,000. Those people are not even going to most likely get sentenced to jail, but we're going to hold. These are people that are still being held a week and 2 weeks later. And I'm not asking you to investigate this, but we'll disagree. And those people may have missed or whatever, but those lists go on in low-level misdemeanor offenses where some people have missed court, and we're not addressing any of the things that are the obstacles of that. That person really should be released. And we have the ability right now, if we wanted to, if our judges asked them to do that right now, to start setting up those processes to help those people get back to court. We have those things, but we don't do that. We release them and tell them to come back to court and deal with these things yourselves, and you better come back or else you lose your money. We don't think about what some of the lives are, the people that are coming into the systems, or the obstacles. And if we dealt with it, we would save a lot more money. If we spent a little bit of that money on the front end, we wouldn't be spending $71 a day to hold someone on an assured clear distance in a false alarm for 2 weeks. That person shouldn't sit in there. And there's scores of these people, and these are just the misdemeanors. Let's talk about low-level possession offenses, felonies. Let's talk about things like breaking and entering. Low-level, someone breaking into a garage, not into someone's house. Let's talk about possessory offenses and things like that. There are scores of those people sitting there that could be in treatment if they were released. Those people could be back with their families. They could be in treatment. They can be productive. Instead, they're sitting. And they don't get to see a felony judge who might, like Judge Cooper has Veterans Court, she might not see that veteran right away. Drug court may not see that person for a week or two. Guess what's already occurred, possibly? Loss of home, loss of job, families moved on, community affected. And then we're dealing with it, and then we're putting those people in with those services. And that's not right. There's a procedure to do so. All we have to do is have a little bit of the will to do it. We already have the connections through services to do it. We just got to have the will.
So, do any of you want to say anything else? We'll start with some questions from the audience.
No, let's go with questions. Yeah, down for that.
I don't think these things, I don't think it's going to work because they have short cords. So, can you all hear me? Okay. But, and the other thing is, I know we have judges in the audience, and we'd love to hear from some of you if you have something to say. But we'll start with a question for Dot.
How did Cleveland accomplish their trial?
How did Cleveland accomplish their
The
bail
bail
program?
reform. So the bail projects in Cleveland, it's a national The bail project is a national nonprofit. It started with the Bronx Defenders by a woman named Robin Steinberg. Robin Steinberg, brilliant woman, and now she...
Great TED Talk.
Yes, she has a great TED Talk. I commend it to you. And Robin went around the country basically setting up now these bail projects. She sets up a nonprofit. They get funding to fund for the staff, but otherwise they get a pot of money that then revolves. It's called a revolving bail fund because they pay the bail, the person gets
How
out.
can Hamilton County get it?
Yeah, well, we are working on that.
Very
Actually,
hard. We're working very hard on that.
Bill and I are working on it very hard. I work for a funder now, which, by the way, is in conversation with the bail project. So yes, we're very eager to expand their work here. And I think the beauty of it is that although in one way the bail project keeps the whole crazy mechanisms of how bail works currently intact, they just basically pay the bail, get people out, allow them to come back. it ends up in the long run critiquing the system and showing what dignity actually does for people, and then it creates reform. So it's kind of a long-term game. Yeah.
My question is this two in one. My
Yeah,
question
Kevin.
is based on the bill reform since, why hasn't it, the reason I have heard word on the street is the reason why the bill project hasn't made it down here in the Hamilton County is because they cannot get all the judges on one accord in municipal court to be able to waive court costs. Is that correct?
That's not what I understand. It's more about raising
We have a
funds
judge
to get
right
there.
here.
Because of the- and my next question is there is a centralized data collection system for judges to determine if they're making unbiased decisions when it comes to their discretion on determining bail?
Yeah, so that's, I think, actually, the conversation back and forth between Julie and Bill goes to a really great point, right? All of us should be able to answer this question with a click of a mouse right now. Really,
Right.
every day of the week. We should be able to figure out who are people. We can take out people's names, but we should be able to ask certain basic data questions based on race, based on, the bond level or that kind of thing.
So there is no centralized data system for judges to see how they're determining or using their discretion to determine bail.
Yeah,
So
and
there is
comparing
no-
themselves apples to apples with other judges.
Is
They
there,
don't
is
really know.
there no data or way to collect that information to see if judges are?
Well,
making
there's a way.
There's a way. It's not collected.
It's not collected. That's what I'm trying to figure
Is
out.
the
So we
clerk
can't
courts
see
here?
there's data.
Well,
to
it
see
may
there's
be
bias.
collected, it's not the court was here.
One at a time. Do you want to?
Well, that's your
Well,
bad.
so I'm a common pleas court judge. I ran in 2018. One of the things I ran on was not so much bail data collection, but sentencing, so we could see if people were sentenced fairly. There is no, so there are 88 counties in Ohio. There's no centralized data bank for sentencing, which for me, as a judge, I think my most important job, where I have the most discretion and the most impact on people, is when I sentence them. We don't even have that information, which I think is more important. I think it'd be great if we had the information about bail, but we don't even collect it for the even more important information, which we should be doing on a statewide basis, and we could do on a countywide basis, and which hopefully we will do on a countywide basis. And, the clerk was here. So he has all of the information. It's just a question of the willingness of the court to invest the money in the building the database to put that up, which the city basically and I worked with the city before I came to the county. The city already has a very robust data analytics department that does all of that for the city's data. So it's not like it's difficult, it's just a question of doing it.
Right.
And I just want to add too, as a researcher, somebody who's made lots of requests and lots of FOIA requests, constantly getting denied. So it's available, but for some reason, it's not shareable, and it's unfortunate.
The jail will only tell you right now what the racial makeup of the jail is and gender. That's what they'll tell you. They cannot tell you, believe it or not, with a push of a button, who's being held pre-trial, who's serving a sentence. They can't tell you with a push of a button whether it's a misdemeanor, whether what their population looks like. They can't break that down for you. They have to do that by hand is what the request is. They go in there by hand and do it. They have the data available if they want to enter it and pull that up.
Somebody knows something about the jail?
So, I'm the former major of the jail,
Yes?
and what I'd like to tell you is that's absolutely true. It's incredibly frustrating. When I was the major of the jail, that is the information that I saw immediately. Let's look at the data. Let's find out who's in here, why, where are they from, what are they doing? And our system was so archaic, I mean, I just have to say it that way, that we're able to glean off some of those, just those basic amounts of information, and then, it has to come from the top, that you have an interest in doing it, invest in that infrastructure, invest in that data, and have the guts to release it. That's the key. You have to have the guts to tell the public, this is who's in our jail, and now what do we do about it? It can't be a secret. There's been too many secrets in that jail, I'll just say it very plainly, that are not shared with the public. And if we don't share them, we can't fix it. And I believe everyone in this room has an interest in fixing it. That's all. So absolutely, we do have a data issue that needs to be fixed immediately.
Okay. I'd like to ask a non-panel member a question, Major McGuffey.
Yes.
So whose responsibility is it to, in their budget, and who would approve it to build a system like you're talking about?
Well, that's the discretion of the sheriff.
There you go.
The sheriff of Hamilton County has the budget, which is funded by the general fund. The general fund funds our data, funds our records department, and quite frankly, I believe we can probably find lots of grants to help us. I think we can find money to build that without taxing and overtaxing the taxpayers currently, because it's something innovative and new that other people are doing that we can also do. So yeah, that's the sheriff's discretion.
Thank you.
And I will just also add, you'll have lots of academic partners that would be.
So it needs the will to do it, is what it needs.
Yes.
Elizabeth.
Okay. We elect our judges, so I'd like the opinion of the panel on what should we as voters be asking judge candidates to get at some of these issues. Because what I was hearing is a lot of this is on the judges right now and what's going on. So what should we as voters be looking for in judicial candidates?
That's a great question.
It is a great question. I think this is a simple question is, how will you maximize liberty? You know, what will you do to maximize liberty? There are some efforts at state level bail reform. Criminal Rule 46 we talked about. There could be legislation, in theory, that would be a lovely thing to change how bail works, and I would be very excited about statewide, consistent, bail reform, like New York has. However, we could do bail reform tomorrow by court rule. Hamilton County Court of Common Pleas or municipal court, like any other court in the state, has the power to set its own local rules. They could do lots of things. There's plenty of space within the Constitution. And by the way, you mentioned there's no right to bail. There actually is right to bail in Ohio. Under the Ohio Constitution. And so we have that in place, the Ohio Constitution and some statutes, court rules, and yet with all those statewide, state-level things in place, Constitution and statute, there's still plenty of room to do the kinds of things I was talking about and suggesting earlier, where we maximize liberty, minimize incarceration, maximize public safety. All that can happen through court rules. And so I and others like the Amos Project and the Pretrial Justice Institute, which actually is working here in Hamilton County, have got some proposals that are really specific. Things like making sure ability to pay is a required part of every bail decision. Like, can you pay this bail when I set it? Things like a presumption of release. All that stuff could be baked into the local rules. So that, you could ask about those kinds of questions. Would you support those kinds of reforms?
And the other, I just want to add too, is what I would do is talk to your constituents, talk to your community members, because a lot of what judges do is about risk aversion. So they make this. I mean, it's sometimes their own, whatever, but it's like the second something bad happens in the criminal justice system, then we get back, we get conservative, we don't want to make these changes. So I understand that a lot of you get this, but a lot of the public does not get this. And a lot of things that New York is dealing with, about like one person was released on this new thing, went out and committed this minor offense, and now it's like, see, we told you, we tried to tell you. So it's important to talk to the judges, but it's also important to talk to your neighbors, friends, family members, so that we can take these kind of risks to do these things. And something bad might happen, like another crime, but doesn't mean then we harm millions of other people because of one thing.
And what about talk?
You were asking, sorry, one more thing about bail. So this is part of sort of a blitz of events. Hamilton County is kind of getting soaked in bail reform stuff. It's great. I'm very excited about it. So Amos Project had two things last week. There's this event tonight. This Sunday, there will be a candidates forum for all sheriffs and prosecutor candidates to come talk about things, including bail reform. Nonpartisan, open to the public. And then, if you want to go deep into some of the, you're here and you're that kind of wonky person like really wants to know the details.
Flyers in the back.
Oh yeah, there's a flyer in the back. Is this about the March 7th event? Yeah, and then on March 7th, flyer back there. There will also be an in-depth training to Saturday with the Pretrial Justice Institute and their own Dr. Zaria Davis, who lives here in Hamilton County, as well as other their folks will be coming in. So lots of opportunities if you want to get deep into this stuff.
I think Jan was next.
No, I just wanted to say the thing he said about Amos. Sunday at 3:30 at the Incline.
Okay, back here.
Say that out loud again.
Oh yeah, Amos Project is sponsoring a
7:30.
candidates forum. It is this Sunday. It is at 3:30 p.m. and it is at Incline Missional Community. That's on Price Hill on Elbron. On Elbron. There you go. Incline Missional Community on Elbron. 3:30 this Sunday.
Okay, thank you.
I think we should remember that bail is to assure appearance in court. And what's kind of bothersome to me is that we're into this risk assessment. And the professor from UC said this is better than discretion. Well, what risk assessment has supplanted in Hamilton County is a program that we had over 40 years ago, the Greater Cincinnati Bail Project. I happen to be the director of it. We had used the Vera point scale, which has now been abandoned. The Vera point scale was utilized. We had a 98% appearance rate for everyone we recommended. Did the judges follow it? I'll mention a name of a judge who's deceased. He followed it 100% of the time of what we recommended.
What's his name?
Judge Fellerhoff, he's now deceased. There's a judge living now who now is in another position who followed it 5% of the time. Judges were setting bonds based on what the charge was. But if they followed our recommendations, there was a 98% appearance rate. This whole thing has been abandoned for risk assessment. Where did we go wrong?
My question is, because it's called the Arnold Foundation Risk Assessment, and I'm finding out more about the Arnold Foundation. They actually own our GPS and EMU monitor organizations. So I just be feeling like companies that already has a risk assessment with the judges are double dipping, and I'm thinking some of these judges have interest too in some of these companies. So I don't know your financial statements on judges. Some of them keep their financial things personal. That's your personal business. But when you see that companies like the Arnold Foundation Risk Assessment is developing risk assessments we find that we know that is unbiased, and we saying that Arnold Foundation, that same company, is owning GPS monitors and EMUs and piggybacking off of that. So it makes me think, who's allowing this to happen? Who's profiteering off
And I
it?
just need to.
Sir, I don't want to get off the point here. Did we abandon the Vera point scale because it worked? It worked perfectly. Why are we not doing
Well,
that?
and that was actually part of the Manhattan Project, was
Right,
the Vera Institute.
and the Vera
so then-
Institute-
Yep, that was based off of that, what you were.
And the Vera Institute was working here.
Right.
And they set up a citation program for the police.
Right, and so I think when we shifted again in the 80s and 90s, I think that a lot of that went away, unfortunately, but hopefully, I think some of it is coming back now with these newer assessments.
But not with risk assessment, it's not coming back.
Okay.
We had,
Well, you said the
ours
judges already
was
used
based on ties to the community. That's what assures appearance in court, and it doesn't matter what the charge is, felonies, misdemeanors, the judges had it in their head, whatever the charge is, we'll set the bond.
But I will say there are issues with ties to the community as well as that being the measure. And I think that was one of the early critiques of the Manhattan Project, was ties to the community, then again, still has disproportionate impacts.
Can I speak just on the, well, no, go ahead, ma'am.
I just want to know if, what's the cost savings? If we had a third of the people less, or 2/3 less in jail, why couldn't we sell this on the basis of what it costs us as taxpayers?
Great question.
And who's doing the study?
Yes.
We know it'd be a lot.
I will say, this I can say confidently, the ACLU of Ohio will be releasing a very in-depth, like with a PhD economist, look at the cost savings that bail reform would produce in 3 different counties. They picked a big urban, I think it was Cuyahoga, a smaller town, perhaps.
But that's how
Green,
you're gonna sell it.
and then one rural, and it will be what do the cost savings look like in different types and sizes of counties in the state? That will be released this spring. I don't have that in depth, it's a pretty wonky kind of thing to produce, but it is being produced.
And I was just saying though, on the flip side, cost savings is, I mean, but then other people lose, right? So taxpayers might be saving money, but like
The
jails
bail
are
bonds.
losing. So it's not always as simple. That's not, like I mentioned, the bail bondsmen, they're fighting this hard.
I'm sure.
On a national level, there's the data says that there's over $38 million a day spent on individuals who are incarcerated
Who are
on a
innocent.
low-level nonviolent offense, and that computes to about $14 billion a year that they are incarcerated. And here in Ohio, 57%, 57% of the individuals that are currently incarcerated now, they're in there awaiting trial. 57%.
That's right. Crazy.
And 65%, I mean, that costs you $65 per day
Yeah.
while they're awaiting trial, which amounts to $5 a day if they were not incarcerated, but just was under some supervision, like a monitoring day or something of that nature. But I wanted to, from a state standpoint, from a legislative standpoint, I worked with Steve and some others on the bail reform. And one of our recommendations was data collection. You know, we need to do that in order to come up with something that we can base our decisions on. That is still being discussed. But the issue is this. Whatever we do, whatever groups like this do, their recommendations may be presented to the legislature. The legislature then has to decide, do we put those recommendations into law? Problem with that is that then you're going to have those opposed to the recommendations and those that come in and give support. They come in, they testify. Well, what we're faced with oftentimes is that the judicial conference, the judges in the judicial conference, they usually, once they get the recommendations, they make a whole bunch of changes. And oftentimes those changes are because they are in fear of losing their discretion when it comes to make sentencing and things of that nature. So they make changes. And the other opposition comes from the Prosecutors Association. There are prosecutors who, in various counties, in order to, one of their methods by which they get elected is to be tough on crime. And anything that looks like it's going to be soft on crime, like releasing individuals who should be in jail for breaking in my car, they will make changes as well. The legislators respond to those recommendations if the majority see that, well, the Judicial Conference is a little against this, Prosecutors Association is against it. It goes nowhere. It sits and collects dust, those recommendations. And that has been pretty much how things go. Now, we are trying to move forward with a number of recommendations. I don't know if they've been made public yet. Stephen, do you know if the recommendations from the Bail Reform Commission is, I don't think they've been.
From the Sentencing Commission?
No, the Sentencing Commission was different.
Yeah.
You mean the Supreme
I've
Court?
got the recommendations, but they're not for public, I don't think
I
they're.
saw them online.
Oh, so the recommendations are online?
For the Supreme Court?
Yeah.
Yeah, those have been published. Yes.
Okay, well, good. All right, because often, the last time I got mine, they said it's not ready for public discussion.
Okay, it's out now. It's out.
So there are recommendations that are out there. I understand that one of the recommendations was the assessment tool. However, recently I was told that the Judicial Conference did not agree with the assessment tool. And so now that's been pulled out of the recommendations. There's some things going on there. But my point is this, folks. We definitely need bail reform in the state of Ohio.
Yes.
It's just as simple as that. We need to get it into the 21st century. And the only way we're going to do that is we've got to make sure that you lobby your legislators. Because they're the ones that are going to make, now we can do it here in Hamilton County, but I can tell you right now, Joe Dieters is not going to do it. It's not, no offense to you. He's not gonna do it. But my point is that we're trying to do it statewide. And we can do that if this group, if everybody pick up their phone, they write letters, come up and testify as to the importance of judicial reform, bail reform, we can make it happen. But it's up to those legislators like myself and others. But right now, there's no real interest in changing it.
Do we have any other questions?
I have one more question about the legislation.
Yeah.
When it comes down to the legislation and writing, I look at it like all my representatives are not on the committee that I need them to be on the committee, because it first has to go through a committee. And when it comes into the House and you got your state representatives, my state representative I think is Kathy Ingram, and my Kathy Ingram is not on the committee that I need to when it comes to changing bail reform. So when I reach out to the other ones on that committee, my question is, how as a person who's not representing my area is going to take me seriously and listen to me if I have a representative who represents me is not even on the committee that can do anything or say anything about bail reform? Because I'm finding out now they're saying if we put this in the Democratic hands, the Republicans are going to tear it down because they're going to feel like it's a Democratic issue.
Okay, so we'll let Cecil
my
answer
whole
that
question
question.
is, how do I get bubble
Okay.
out all of that to find out the right people to listen to me to say, hey, we need the bail reform because my Democrat friends are not.
Okay, we're gonna let
in
our
that position.
legislator answer that question.
Okay.
Well, let me, if Kathy Ingram is
Is my rep?
I'm your rep as well.
I know, but you're in the Senate. She's in the House. You on that committee though. You on that right committee though. You on that right committee.
No, but I think, see, there are those on the other side of the aisle that do agree that we need change, but there's just not a majority to make that happen.
Right.
And so we have to be able to really reach them in some form or another. The criminal justice system in Ohio cannot continue to bear the weight of the number of individuals that are incarcerated in our penitentiaries. We have a facility, our incarceration rate should be about 43 to 44,000. That's the average. We're close to 50,000. So we're way over. And we just don't have and the cost of that is costing us close to $2 billion per year. And we cannot continue to do that. So we have to come up with ways, not only at the state level, but at the local level, to relieve our jails of all the overcrowding that's existing. And this bail reform will be one of the ways to make that happen. And there are a number of recommendations. I urge each and one of you to look at those recommendations, even though I would like to see it with a lot more teeth. It's a beginning. It's a start.
And if you just Google bail reform, a bunch of things will come up, and the recommendations from the Supreme Court will come up.
All I can tell you is,
It
again,
should be a nonpartisan issue. It's something
it
that
should
we
be,
should also.
but it's not. When someone says bail reform, like if it hasn't come through tonight, the devil is in the details. There are a lot of details, and there are so many devils. So beware of Googling it, actually. Not because it's not bad to do your own research, but just because there's so much out there. So if you want two simple sources, one, the ACLU of Ohio is the best in the state. JohnsonGrove, Claire Chevrier are the smartest people I know in this state working on bail reform. ACLU of Ohio, they have a simple one-pager about these are the rigorous kind of things we need. When we say bail reform, we mean this. Pretrial Justice Institute also, best resources in the world on their website. Come to the event in a couple weeks, flyers on the table.
All right, and Dr. Ruhland is happy to share her PowerPoint that has additional references, and we know that we need the academics to get more data.
And we got to make our prosecutor's office more diverse. There are over 170 prosecutors in the prosecutor's office, and only 2 are African Americans. 2 out of 170.
I want to thank our panelists before everybody leaves. Julie Wilson, Stephen,